Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Rechakodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of 2 Chronicles, the 35th chapter. And in here we see some of the things that Josiah did, right? Namely, the Passover that was kept during his reign, and ultimately how he ends up dying, which would then lead us into the last chapter in 2 Chronicles. Now, it's important to note that at this time, right, historically, in terms of secular history, the Assyrians are still, well, at least they were still known as the dominant, world empire, right, the main empire at this time. However, right around this time is also where we see them nearing their end / their demise, okay, and then the rising up of the Babylonian or the Neo-Babylonian Empire. So as we get to, as we read through, we'll jump through and get some context on that and how that relates here to Israel. So for the bulk of what we've read in the book of 2 Chronicles, the Assyrian Empire has been that superpower at that time, right, having deported the northern kingdom out of their land, and imported the heathens in there, and so on and so forth. So this is 2 Chronicles 35:1. Moreover, Josiah kept a Passover unto the Lord Yahweh in Jerusalem, and they killed the Passover on the 14th day of the first month. And he set the priests in their charges, and encouraged them to the service of the house of the Lord. And their charges, meaning their appropriate roles that they had to play. And he said unto the Levites that taught all Israel, which were holy unto the Lord, put the holy ark in the house which Solomon the son of David, king of Israel, did build. It shall not be a burden upon your shoulders. Serve now the Lord Yahweh your God and his people Israel. So in other words, the ark is going to be resting in the temple, all right, and it doesn't need to burden you anymore, considering that the burden being carrying it, right? You don't have to carry it all around anymore like you did back in the wilderness. For now, you can just place it in the temple and focus on serving the Lord and his people, i.e. ministering in your respective roles. And prepare yourselves by the houses of your fathers after your courses, according to the writing of David, king of Israel, and according to the writing of Solomon, his son. Now, the houses of your fathers, remember, even when you go back to the wilderness, the Most High divided the responsibility of the temple and of ministering to him amongst the Levites by the houses of their fathers. So you had I remember you had the Kohathites, you had the, who was it? It was Kohath. I believe Merari was one of them. Let's see, the families of the Levites divisions. There we go. Gershom. There we go. So you had those that descended from Gershom, so the Gershonites, the Kohathites, and Merarites, those that descended from Merari. So it says here, the descendants of Aaron, the Kohanim, had the special role as priest in the tabernacle in the wilderness and also in the temple in Jerusalem. The remaining Levites were divided into three groups: Gershonites, descendants of Gershon, Kohathites from Kohath, and Merarites from Merari. So they all had different responsibilities, as you can see here, right? And these were the three sons of Levi, except the ones with Aaron, the sons of Aaron had an exclusive role, right? So it says here, the Gershonites, whose father, Gershon was the father of Libni and Shimei. The Gershonites were responsible for carrying the curtains and other lighter items of the tabernacle. The Kohath, had four sons, Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uziel. The Kohathites were responsible for carrying the Ark of the Covenant and other sacred vessels. And then we had the Merarites. Merari had two sons, Mali and Mushi. The Merarites were responsible for carrying the heavier parts of the tabernacle, such as the beams and the sockets. So this was the original division. But later on, I believe this is now during the time of David, right? You had the later divisions where it says, in latter generations, the Levites were further divided into 24 guards for the temple service. Because at this point, you didn't need to, like, it wasn't really a need to carry about the things in the tabernacle, because the temple was now stationary, right? And so, as you see here, the specific duties of how they were divided. The Levites assisted the priests, the descendants of Aaron, in the temple service, including purifying holy things, maintaining the courts and chambers, and serving as gatekeepers and musicians. So these were a part of the divisions. So when you go back to 2 Chronicles and it talks about preparing themselves by the house of their fathers or after their courses, this goes back to the further division, the 24 courses or orders that King David divided the Levites into, which correspond to various roles they would play in maintaining the temple according to their family line. So it says here, and according to the writing of Solomon his son, and stand in the holy place according to the divisions of the families of the fathers of your brethren the people, and after the division of the families of the Levites. So kill the Passover, and sanctify yourselves, and prepare your brethren, that they may do according to the word of the Lord Yahweh by the hand of Moses. So their role was obviously they would kill the Passover, they would prepare it, but they would also instruct, right, their brethren, like the remaining Israelites in okay, do this, do that, so on and so forth. And Josiah gave to the people of the flock lambs and kids, all for the Passover offerings, for all that were present, to the number of 30,000 and 3,000 bullocks. These were of the king's substance. So out of his portion, he offered right freely to those that were present this amount. And his princes gave willingly unto the people, to the priests and to the Levites, Hilkiah and Zechariah and Jehiel, rulers of the house of God, gave unto the priests for the Passover offerings 2,600 small cattle and 300 oxen. So they also gave certain amounts to the people, because not everybody had the ability to afford all of cattle and so on. Conaniah also, and Shemaiah, and Nathaniel, his brethren, and Hashabiah, and Jael, and Jozabad, chief of the Levites, gave unto the Levites for the Passover offerings 5,000 small cattle and 500 oxen. Keep in mind, you had Passover offerings, right? But that's different from the Passover itself that they would kill and eat. So the service was prepared, and the priests stood in their place, and the Levites in their courses, according to the king's commandment. And they killed the Passover, and the priests sprinkled the blood from their hands, and the Levites flayed them. And flay is like to strip or to divide them. And they removed the burnt offerings, that they might give according to the divisions of the families of the people, to offer unto the Lord Yahweh, as it is written in the book of Moses. So did they with the oxen. So they divided the, when you look at this in the NLT, it's a bit clearer, because the way it's worded as removed, it may be a little misleading, but they divided the burnt offerings so that it could be, all those that were there, right, by the division of their families, might have an offering appropriate to their for them on their behalf. And so they did that with the oxen. And they roasted the Passover with fire according to the ordinance, But the other holy offerings saw they in pots, and in cauldrons, and in pans, and divided them speedily among the people. So the Levites were taking care of this. And afterward they made ready for themselves and for the priests, because the priests, the sons of Aaron, were busied in offering of burnt offerings and the fat until night. So you had the priests that were the sons of Aaron that were offering. They were making the offerings with the cattle, right, the bullock and so on. These were actual burnt offerings that would be burnt on the altar, which is different than the Passover that was killed and made ready for them to actually eat. But since the sons of Aaron were busy offering the burnt offerings that whole entire time, the remaining Levites ended up preparing the Passover for them, since they were busy already offering these offerings here. And the singers, the sons of Asaph, were in their place, according to the commandment of David, and Asaph, and Heman, and Jeduthun, the king's seer. And the porters waited at every gate, that they might not depart from their service, for their brethren the Levites prepared for them. So the porters, being the gatekeepers, they were obviously appointed at each gate, and so the Levites prepared the Passover for them. That way they didn't have to leave their post or their service. So all the priests of the Lord Yahweh, or Slakia, so all the service of the Lord Yahweh was prepared the same day to keep the Passover and to offer burnt offerings upon the altar of the Lord Yahweh, according to the commandment of King Josiah. And the children of Israel that were present kept the Passover at that time, and the feast of unleavened bread 7 days. And there was no Passover like that kept in Israel from the days of Samuel the prophet, neither did all the kings of Israel keep such a Passover as Josiah kept. And the priests and the Levites and all Judah and Israel that were present, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. In the 18th year of the reign of Josiah was this Passover kept. After all this, when Josiah had prepared the temple, so now we've dealt with the Passover. This was during his 18th year. Now, if we look up here, King Josiah, let's take a look here. So from 640 to 609, if we round that up to 6010, right, that's about what? 640 to 630, 620, 610, about 30 years or so. So his 18th year, so let's round it up to like the 20th year. That would bring us to about what? 630, 620, which is about maybe 10 or so years, give or take, before the end of his reign. That means when we come here, right, jumping down, because reading from verse 20 on down, this eventually leads to Josiah's death. So we're looking at somewhere around close to 10 years after, between verse 19 and verse 20. So, and it says after all this, it doesn't mean that the next week or the next, day or so. Okay. But it says, but after all this, when Josiah had prepared the temple, Necho, king of Egypt, came up to fight against Carchemish by Euphrates, and Josiah went out against him. Now, in between this time period, from verse 19 to verse 20, a lot has now taken place, right? Both in Israel and in the overall world. And at this point, prior to verse 20, we've started, or at least in secular history, the reigning empire, being the Neo-Assyrian Empire, is now starting to see its demise. And it is at its lowest point, as it's about to pretty much be done away with and taken over by the Medo-Babylonian conquest. It is at this point that Pharaoh Necho goes up to Carchemish to try and join that battle. All right, so let's read a little bit here. Let me actually take a look here and see what we have. Rise of Babylon, meets intervention, aftermath. Does it take us to Carchemish? Yes, it does. All right, so let's take a quick look here. So this is under the Medo-Babylonian conquest of the Assyrian Empire. So I'll read this real quick, and this is just, it coincides with the same as the collapse of the Assyrian Empire. So it says here, in the first half of the 7th century, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was at the height of its power, controlling the entire Fertile Crescent. And the Fertile Crescent, as you can see, is this part diagrammed over here. So they had this whole area. This included our land, Israel, all the way into Shinar or Mesopotamia and all of that. And allied with Egypt. Okay, let's keep that in mind. However, when Assyrian king Ashur-bani-pal died of natural causes in 631 BC, his son and successor Ashur-etil-ilani was met with opposition and unrest, a common occurrence in Assyrian history. An Assyrian official named Nabu-ritu-usur attempted to usurp the Assyrian throne with the help of another official, Sin-shar-ibni. But the king, likely with the help of Sin-shumu-lishir, stopped Nabu-ritu-usur and Sin-shar-ibni, crushing the conspiracy relatively quickly. So at this point, we're already seeing there's like instability in the kingdom here. However, it is possible that some of Assyria's vassals used the reign of what they perceived to be a weak ruler to free themselves from Assyrian control and even attack Assyrian outposts. So some of those provinces or areas that they had control over started to look at this and say, this is a good time to break free from their reign. In 628 BC, Josiah, an Assyrian vassal and the king of Judah in the Levant, extended his land so that it reached the coast, capturing the city of Ashdod and settling some of his own people there. Ashur-etil-ilani's end is unclear, but it is frequently assumed, without any supporting evidence, that Ashur-etil-ilani's brother, Shin-sharish-kun, fought with him for the throne, and ultimately ascended to the throne in the middle of 627 BC. Roughly at the same time, the vassal king of Babylon, Kandalanu, died, which led to Shin-sharish-kun also becoming the ruler of Babylon, as proven by inscriptions by him in southern cities such as Nippur, Uruk, Sapar, and Babylon itself. Around this time, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was also in the midst of a 125-year-long mega drought, stretching from 675 to 550 BC, which further weakened the empire. So this background is just to lay the foundation, give you an idea of what is going on internally in the Assyrian Empire at this point, leading up to their demise. Now we have the course of the war. And this is all taking place, somewhere between or around verses 19 down to 20 there. That's all, give or take. So, rise of Babylon. Shin-sharish-kun's rule of Babylon did not last long, as almost immediately in the wake of him coming to the throne, the general Sin-shumu-lishir rebelled. Sin-shumu-lishir was a key figure during Ashur-etil-ilani's reign, putting down several revolts and possibly being the de facto leader of the country. The new king might have endangered his position, therefore he revolted in an attempt to seize power for himself. Sin-shumu-lishir seized some cities in northern Babylonia, including Nippur and Babylon itself, and would rule there for 3 months before being defeated by Shin-sharish-kun. Nabopolassar, possibly using the political instability caused by the previous revolt and the ongoing interregnum in the south, assaulted both Nippur and Babylon. In the aftermath of the failed Assyrian counterattack, Nabopolassar was formally crowned king of Babylon on November 23rd or 22nd, 626 BC, restoring Babylonia as an independent kingdom. So Nabopolassar, who revolted here and basically ended up getting control over Babylon. This being the father of Nebuchadnezzar II. He ends up getting control over this area and pretty much breaking Babylon from the hold of Assyria. So now Babylon is an independent kingdom with him as the ruler. In 625 to 623 BC, Shinshirishkun's forces attempted to defeat Nabopolassar, campaigning in northern Babylonia. Now, not going to read through all these details here, but I'll give you the gist of what's happening here, right? So, Nabopolassar is now king of Babylon. Seems here that the Assyrians basically try to take that back, right? Try to come back, basically snap back at Nabopolassar for doing this, right? It says here, the Assyrian campaigns were initially successful, seizing the city of Sippar in 625 BC and repelling Nabopolassar's attempt to reconquer Nippur. Another Assyrian vassal, Elam, and you know where that's at, also stopped paying tribute to Assyria during this time, and several Babylonian cities, such as Dur, revolted and joined Nabopolassar. So now we start to see that there is now like a rallying behind Nabopolassar, with these other vassals also revolting against the Assyrians. Man, this thing. Realizing the threat this posed, Shinshirishkun led a massive counterattack himself, which saw the successful recapture of Uruk in 623 BC. Now let's jump down a bit. Okay. All right. During the next years, the Babylonians scored several other victories against the Assyrians, and by 616 BC, Nabopolassar's forces had reached as far as the Balik River. So now there was like this straight back and forth, pretty much like a war going on between Babylon and Assyria. Pharaoh Psamtik I, Assyria's ally, remember they were allied to Egypt, marched with his forces to help Shinshirishkun. The Egyptian pharaoh had over the last few years campaigned in order to establish dominance over the small cities or the small city-states in the Levant. And it was in his interest that Assyria survived as a buffer state between his own empire and those of the Babylonians and the Medes in the east. So to Pharaoh or to Egypt, Assyria was like a good, empire or reign that would block him from, or block the Medes and Babylon from him. So he was happy as long as they were in power. A joint Egyptian-Assyrian campaign to capture the city of Gablinu was undertaken in October 616 BC, but ended in defeat, after which the Egyptian allies kept to the west of the Euphrates, only offering limited support. In 616 BC, the Babylonians defeated Assyrian forces at Arapha and pushed them back to the Little Zap. Nabopolassar failed to seize Ashur and the ceremonial and religious center of Assyria in May of the next year, forcing him to retreat to Tikrit, but the Assyrians were unable to capture Tikrit and end his rebellion. So this is still ongoing. For these years, Nabopolassar, king of Babylon, is going back and forth with the Assyrians, and, they're pretty much going at it. So now we see the Medes' intervention. In October or November 615 BC, the Medes under King Cyaxares invaded Assyria and conquered the region around the city of Arpa, in preparation for a great final campaign against the Assyrians. So now we have not only Babylon, but also the Medes here that are both coming against the Assyrians. That same year, they defeated Shinshirishkun at the Battle of Tarbisu, and in 614, they conquered Assur, plundering the city and killing many of its inhabitants. Nabopolassar only arrived at Assur after the plunder had already begun and met with Cyaxares, allying with him, signing an anti-Assyrian pact, and Nebuchadnezzar, son of Nabopolassar, married a Median princess. So they formed an alliance through marriage here. And this now joined their forces. So now it wasn't just Babylon or just Media, but the Babylon or the Medo-Babylonian joint forces coming against Assyria, ultimately leading to Assyria's downfall. Shortly after, Sin-Sharishkun made his last attempt at a counterattack, rushing to rescue the besieged city of Rahilu, but Nabopolassar's army retreated before a battle could take place. In 612 BC, the Medes and Babylonians joined their forces to besiege Nineveh, which was one of the main cities in Assyria, taking the city after a lengthy and brutal siege, with the Medes playing a major part in the city's downfall. Although Sin-Sharishkun's fate is not entirely certain, it is commonly accepted that he died in defense of Nineveh. So now they've taken Nineveh. And let me see here what we have here. Let's go down. Let's go down. There we go. All right. I think this should be good. So after the destruction of Assur in 614 BC, the traditional Assyrian coronation was impossible. So Ashur-uballit II was crowned in Haran, which he made his new capital, because Nineveh was now destroyed. While the Babylonians saw him as the Assyrian king, the few remaining subjects Ashur-uballit II governed likely did not share this view, and his formal title remained Crown Prince. However, Ashur-uballit not formally being a king does not indicate that his claim to the throne was challenged, only that he had yet to go through the traditional ceremony. So because he hadn't gone through the traditional ceremony, they just refer to him as Crown Prince. Ashur-uballit's main objective would have been to retake Assyrian heartland, including Assur and Nineveh, bolstered by the forces of his allies Egypt and Mania. This ambition was quite possible, and his temporary rule from Haran as crown prince, rather than legitimately crowned king, may have seemed more like a temporary circumstance. Instead, Ashur-uballit's rule at Haran composes the final years of the Assyrian state, which at this point had effectively ceased to exist as an empire. After Nabopolassar himself had traveled the recently conquered Assyrian heartland in 610 BC in order to ensure stability, the Medo-Babylonian army embarked on a campaign against Haran. And in November 610 BC, intimidated by the approach of the Medo-Babylonian army, Ashur-uballit and a contingent of Egyptian reinforcements fled the city into the deserts of Syria. So now they've come even further west, right, more towards closer to the Levant, right? Because Syria, we know where that's at, a little north of Israel. So now they keep getting pushed back, and now you have the remnants of what was known as the Assyrian Empire fleeing to Syria. The siege of Haran lasted from the winter of 610 BC to the beginning of 609 BC, and the city eventually catapulted. Ashur-uballit's failure at Haran ended the ancient Assyrian state, which would never be restored. After the Babylonians had ruled Haran for 3 months, Ashur-uballit, along with a large force of Egyptian soldiers, attempted to retake the city, launching a siege in June or July of 609 BC. His siege lasted at most 2 months until August or September, before being forced to retreat by Nabopolassar. They may have retreated even earlier. So now we've seen pretty much the taking down of the Assyrian Empire. They're pretty much, on their last legs, if any, at this point. And now we lead into what we see here in 2 Chronicles 35 and 20. So at the point here of defeat, the eventual fate of Ashur-uballit is unknown, and his siege in Haran, and his siege of Haran in 609 BC, is the last time he or the Assyrians in general are mentioned in Babylonian records. After the Battle of Haran, Nabopolassar resumed his campaign against the remainder of the Assyrian army in the beginning of the year 608 or 607 BC. It is thought that Ashur-uballit was still alive at this point, for in 608 BC, the Egyptian pharaoh Necho II, Psamtik I's successor, personally led a large Egyptian army into the former Assyrian territory to rescue his ally and turn the tide of the war. There is no mention of a large battle between the Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, and Medes in 608 BC, which would have been mentioned in contemporary sources as a marked conflict of the four greatest military powers of their day, and there is no later mentions of Ashur-uballit. It is possible he died at some point during 608 BC before such a battle could occur. However, in the book of Jeremiah, there is a good description of how this actual Battle of Carchemish went. The historian M.B. Roten speculates Ashur-uballit could have lived until 606 BC. Cool. Although Ashur-uballit is no longer mentioned after 609 BC, the Egyptian campaigns in the Levant continued for some time until a crushing defeat at the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC. Throughout the next century, Egypt and Babylon, brought into direct contact with each other through Assyria's fall, would frequently be at war with each other over control of the Fertile Crescent. And this Battle of Carchemish is described by Jeremiah in the book of Jeremiah. So coming back here to 2 Chronicles 35 and 20, we now see what has led up to this, where we see, as it says, after all this, when Josiah had prepared the temple, Necho, king of Egypt, this is Necho II, we just read about here, came up to fight against Carchemish by Euphrates, and Josiah went out against them. So Necho was trying to come up to help the Assyrians here in this battle of Carchemish, at least the remnants of what was left. And that's why he had to go through, because if you look here, let's see, Battle of Carchemish. All right, so yeah, this isn't too bad. So if you look here, Necho had to travel through our land to get to Carchemish over there. And of course, Josiah, having control over this area, decided to go to war with him instead. Verse 21, but he sent ambassadors unto him, saying, what have I to do with thee, thou king of Judah? I am come not against thee this day, but against the house wherewith I have war. For God commanded me to make haste. Forbear thee from meddling with God who is with me, that he destroy thee not, and likely being his God, so-called. Nevertheless, Josiah would not turn his face from him, but disguised himself that he might fight with him, and hearkened not unto the words of Necho from the mouth of God, and came to fight in the valley of Megiddo. Now, it could be that the Most High, used, obviously, like, put the spirit on whether it's like Pharaoh's God, his idol's priest or whatever, to inform him, like, yo, you got to go up there now and like go and fight it and try to help the Assyrians, whatever the case is. Long story short, Josiah went out to war against Necho, as it says here, in the valley of Megiddo. And the archers shot at King Josiah, and the king said to his servants, have me away, for I am sore wounded. So he ended up getting hit by that arrow in likely in a vital place. His servants therefore took him out of that chariot and put him in the second chariot that he had, and they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died, and was buried in one of the sepulchres of his fathers. And all Judah and Jerusalem mourned for Josiah. Now keep in mind that it wasn't too long after this that Nebuchadnezzar, right, the Babylonians led by Nebuchadnezzar, which I believe was around 605 BC, end up coming and subjecting Israel or Judah under them. Okay, and I think around that time is where they take captive some of the nobility, Daniel, the three holy children, and so on. And then later years would lead to the siege of Jerusalem and eventually the destruction of the wall and the temple. So Josiah dying at this point really prevented him from seeing that and witnessing that and living through that, which was told to him by Huldah, right, the prophetess, that the Lord would have mercy and he wouldn't see that destruction or the judgment that the Lord would bring upon Israel. Verse 25, and Jeremiah lamented for Josiah, and all the singing men and the singing women spake of Josiah in their lamentations to this day, and made them an ordinance in Israel, and behold, they are written in the lamentations. Now the rest of the acts of Josiah and his goodness, according to that which was written in the law of the Lord Yahweh, and his deeds, first and last, behold, they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. So, pretty much we see here, right, the story of Josiah, how he ends up dying, right? Jeremiah obviously being alive at this time and witnessing this, mourned along with the rest of Israel at this point. So now, going from 2 Chronicles 35, the Assyrian Empire is pretty much no more, right, in terms of secular history. And Josiah is now, gone. So, Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kudash. And until next time, Shalom.